Hey everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a powerful moment where a quiet test reveals the truth. If her memory has truly returned, what happens when the answers are no longer uncertain? If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Yuri begins to question the truth about their mother's memory after noticing her flawless, instinctive actions. Instead of confronting her directly, Yuri carefully asks simple questions about cooking and tradition. But her confident, immediate answers only deepen the suspicion. To be certain, Yuri brings her into a quiet space and presents two complex business projects, shifting from emotional observation to logical evaluation. Calm and focused, she analyzes both options with clarity and precision, delivering a decisive recommendation. In that moment, Yuri realizes the truth. Her memory has fully returned. The tension dissolves as they return to the family, sharing a simple meal together. No one speaks about what happened, yet everything has changed. In the quiet warmth of that evening, surrounded by loved ones, Yuri finds peace, understanding that sometimes presence and connection matter more than any explanation. The warmth of that moment, the soft crackling of rice paper over the fire, the gentle rhythm of hands working together, should have been enough to hold everything in place. But for Yuri, something deeper had already begun to surface, something that couldn't be ignored anymore. Standing just slightly apart from the others, Yuri's attention slowly shifted away from the food, away from the shared activity, and focused entirely on one person, their mother. At first, it was just observation, quiet and patient. But the longer Yuri watched, the clearer it became. Every movement felt too precise, too effortless. The way she handled each ingredient, the way she adjusted without hesitation, the calm confidence in her posture. It didn't match someone who had once struggled to remember even the simplest things about herself. This wasn't trial and error. This wasn't relearning. This was familiarity. A thought began to form, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once it appeared. Yuri didn't rush to confront it. Instead, they chose a different approach, something softer, something that wouldn't disrupt the fragile calm of the moment. The questions came naturally, almost casually, about the rice paper, about traditional cakes, about the way things used to be done. Nothing too direct, nothing that would feel like a test, but each question carried weight beneath its simplicity. And the answers came instantly. No hesitation, no confusion, no searching for words. Her voice remained steady, clear, certain. It wasn't just that she knew the answers, it was how she knew them, as if they had always been there, as if they had never been lost at all. Yuri listened carefully, saying little, letting the silence between each exchange stretch just long enough to feel the tension building beneath it. Because now, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was doubt, turning into something sharper, something that needed clarity. And so, without drawing attention, Yuri gently shifted the moment, stepping away from the warmth of the kitchen, away from the shared space, into somewhere quieter, somewhere more neutral. The transition was subtle, but intentional. The air felt different here, less comforting, more focused, more real. Yuri placed a set of documents on the table, 2 business projects, clean, structured, unrelated to memory tied to routine or habit. This wasn't about cooking. This wasn't about tradition. This was about logic, judgment, the kind of thinking that couldn't be carried by muscle memory alone. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy but controlled. Uri didn't push, didn't explain further, just waited, watching. Their mother picked up the document slowly, her expression calm, composed. Her eyes scanned the pages carefully, taking in the details without rushing. There was no sign of uncertainty, no hesitation in her posture, just focus, real focus. And then she began to speak. Her analysis was clear, structured, every point connected logically to the next. She broke down the strengths, identified the risks, compared the long-term potential. There was no guessing, no vague conclusions. It was precise, confident, decisive. She made a recommendation, and it wasn't tentative. It was certain, backed by reasoning that left no room for doubt. And in that moment, everything shifted. The question that had been building quietly inside Yuri didn't need to be asked anymore. The answer was already there. This wasn't partial recovery. This wasn't fragments of memory returning by chance. This was complete, whole. Her memory hadn't just improved, it had come back, fully. Yuri didn't say it out loud. There was no need. The truth settled deeply, quietly, replacing every doubt, every uncertainty that had been lingering before. And strangely, it didn't feel overwhelming. It didn't feel chaotic. It felt still, like something finally falling into place after being out of alignment for too long. The tension that had been building all this time didn't explode. It dissolved, slowly, naturally, like it had reached its end without needing force. And with that, the moment softened. The focus shifted back, not to the question, not to the realization, but to something simpler, something grounding. Back in the kitchen, the final sheets of grilled rice paper were being lifted from the charcoal fire. The gentle crackling sound returned, filling the space again. The rich aroma spread through the air, warm and inviting, pulling everything back into a sense of normalcy. Zixiao carefully placed the finished pieces onto a plate, still warm, still crisp. Aunt Ngia reached out, taking one, tasting it slowly, her expression softening with quiet satisfaction. No words were needed to describe it. It was enough to feel it. Uri and their mother returned to the space without announcement, without explanation. And no one asked. No one needed to. Because sometimes the most important things don't need to be spoken. They're understood in the way people move, the way they settle back into each other's presence. Uri's mother sat down among them, calm, composed, natural. There was no trace of confusion in her eyes now. No distance, no emptiness, just presence, fully there. Uri sat nearby, watching quietly. Not with suspicion anymore, not with doubt, but with something softer, something that had been missing before. Relief, maybe, or acceptance, the kind that doesn't come from words, but from seeing something clearly for the first time. The room filled slowly with small sounds, light laughter, simple conversation, the quiet rhythm of people sharing a meal. No one talked about what had changed. No one pointed it out, but it was there, woven into the atmosphere, impossible to ignore. Something had returned, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply enough to fill the space that had once felt incomplete. Outside, the sky darkened gradually, the last traces of daylight fading into night. But inside, the light remained, soft, warm, steady. And in that moment, everything felt whole, not perfect, not untouched by what had come before, but complete in a way that mattered. Uri didn't say anything, didn't need to, just sat there, present, holding onto the quiet certainty that had replaced all the questions. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Because there are things in life that don't need to be explained, don't need to be proven or confirmed out loud. Some things just need to exist. And as long as they're still there, still within reach, still shared between the people who matter, that's what gives them meaning. And as the evening continued to settle in, that sense of quiet completion didn't fade. It deepened, spreading gently through every small detail of the moment. The fire beneath the charcoal dimmed slightly, no longer roaring with heat, but glowing softly, just enough to keep the last pieces warm. The plates in front of them slowly filled, then gradually emptied again, not in a rush, but at an easy, unforced pace. No one hurried. No one felt the need to move the moment forward. Because for once, there was nowhere else to be, nothing else demanding attention. Zixiao leaned back slightly, watching the others with a calm expression, as if taking in something that didn't happen often enough. This kind of stillness, this kind of togetherness. Aunt Nia adjusted the plate in front of her, occasionally reaching for another piece, her movements as steady as always, but softer now, more relaxed. And Uri's mother? She simply sat there, present in a way that felt complete, not trying to prove anything, not trying to remember, just existing within the moment, naturally, effortlessly, like she had never been disconnected at all. Uri's gaze drifted back to her again, but this time it was different. There was no searching behind the eyes anymore. No quiet questioning. Just recognition. The kind that doesn't come from logic, but from something deeper, something instinctive. The kind of recognition that tells you something is right, even if you can't fully explain why. The early attention, the careful observation, the silent testing. It all felt distant now, like something that belonged to a different moment entirely. Not gone, but no longer heavy, no longer pressing, because the answer had already been found, not through confrontation, not through force, but through something much simpler. Presence, truth revealed not in words, but in actions that couldn't be faked. The conversation around the table remained light, flowing easily from one topic to another. Small stories, small laughter, nothing too serious, nothing too heavy. And maybe that was what made it meaningful. Because after everything, the uncertainty, the quiet fear, the questions that had lingered without answers, it wasn't a dramatic resolution that brought peace. It was this, something ordinary, something simple, something that didn't need to stand out to be valuable. Outside, the night had fully taken over now. The sounds of the surrounding world softened, blending into a distant hum that barely reached inside. The contrast between outside and inside became more noticeable. The cool darkness beyond the walls, and the warm, steady light within. It created a kind of boundary, not physical, but emotional. Inside this space, everything felt held together, safe, complete. Yuri reached for another piece of rice paper, still warm, still carrying that rich, familiar aroma, and for a brief moment, just paused. Not to think, not to analyze, just to feel the moment as it was. Because sometimes, understanding doesn't need to be active. Sometimes, it's something you allow yourself to settle into. The kind of understanding that doesn't come with questions, but with acceptance. Uri's mother glanced over briefly, a small, natural gesture. Nothing unusual, but enough to meet Yuri's eyes for just a second. And in that brief exchange, there was no confusion, no distance, no hesitation, just connection, clear, present, real. It didn't need to last longer than that. It didn't need to be emphasized, because it said everything that needed to be said. The rest of the evening carried on quietly. Plates shifted, the last pieces were shared, the fire slowly faded until only faint embers remained. No one rushed to clean up immediately. No one broke the atmosphere with unnecessary movement. It was as if everyone understood, without saying it, that this moment was something to hold on to, even if only for a little while longer. And maybe that was the real resolution. Not the confirmation of memory returning, not the answers that had been quietly uncovered, but the fact that they could all sit here together, without tension, without uncertainty, and simply exist in the same space again, whole. Not because everything had been explained, but because nothing needed to be questioned anymore. Uri leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, the kind of breath that releases more than just air, the kind that lets go of everything that had been held in for too long. There was no need to revisit the questions, no need to reopen the uncertainty, because the answer had already become part of the moment, woven into it in a way that didn't require attention. It was just there. And as the final traces of light flickered gently across the room, reflecting off small details, the edges of plates, the surface of the table, the quiet expressions of everyone gathered, it became clear that what mattered most wasn't what had been lost or found. It was what remained, what stayed, what continued to exist, quietly, steadily, even after everything else had shifted. The night deepened, the sounds softened even further, and the moments slowly, naturally, came to rest, not with a dramatic ending, not with a final statement, but with something much quieter, much more lasting. Because in the end, there are things that don't need to be spoken, don't need to be confirmed or explained. Some things, as long as they're still there, still shared, still held between the people who matter, that alone is enough.